What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to XJW Diaries. My name is Justin. So today, I have another special interview for you guys, starting off this 2024 the right way. Another powerful interview, another very deep interview, actually. This interview was actually very eye-opening for me personally. I talked about in my other videos about the subject of suppression quite a bit. And when I was going through the process of finalizing the journaling questions for the XJW workbook, the subject of suppression just kept coming up over and over and over again in all the different categories of the book. Because as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were suppressed in so many ways, throughout so many aspects of our life. But during this interview with Peter, he introduced me to a level of suppression, a new layer that I did not even realize existed. And it's sad that there's so many witnesses out there, even today, that are having to deal with this extra layer of suppression and having to be very silenced about it so as to not get themselves in even more trouble. So in this interview, you will learn about this extra layer of suppression, and you'll get to hear about what it's like to live under those conditions, on top of the conditions of just being a witness. So hopefully you get as much out of this interview as I did. This is Peter's story. Peter, thank you so much for coming onto the channel. Thank you for coming on and being willing to share your story. So my first question I have for you is, how did you get involved with the witnesses in the first place? Did you grow up in it? How did you get involved?
So when I was young, my mother kind of came into the witnesses. I believe it was her mother that started studying, and she kind of passed it along to my mother. And I was very, very young, maybe like 1 to 2 or so, that she started taking me to meetings, and it kind of just became integrated right into life right away. So I was kind of in it before I knew anything else or knew anything better. So for me, it feels like I pretty much was born into it for the most part.
Okay, and how was your school life? How was it? So you came into it as 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So how was it going into elementary school, middle school as a witness? What are some of the things you had to deal with there?
It was pretty rough, not gonna lie. When I was super young, I was, still trying to figure out what was going on with life, and I was looking at life through this lens filter that we were told to look at things through. And unfortunately, because of the way that I was forced to behave, and like my mother was like, you have to be like this, you can't be friends with people, you can't celebrate birthdays, you have to, we have this whole new thing we have to start doing. So it was pretty rough because it made me a target very easily for my peers. Like they would see like, oh, how come every time we have a birthday celebration, he has to get up and leave? Or how come he doesn't, put his hand on his heart for the Pledge of Allegiance or anything like that? It was just weird stuff like that. But it unfortunately made me very bullyable. So that kind of started very early on, and because people knew me so early, I went through school with the same people all throughout high school. So it was pretty rough. It was a lot of things that I wasn't really fully able to defend myself, because they would tell you, well, Jesus would turn the other cheek. He wouldn't engage with these people. He would ignore them. So you have to just ignore when people are making fun of you or hitting you or doing anything like that. And so it was a very, very rough start to school experience. I know, and for me, I knew as early as kindergarten or so that something was kind of different with me. Like I wasn't fully in understanding like what is this exactly, but I knew that I wasn't like the other kids in school. Like they seemed to be attracted to girls, but I was like, oh, okay, I don't feel that the same way. So I knew something was a little different, and it was a lot. I had to do a lot of keeping things to myself as I went through school, and definitely a difficult process for sure.
Yeah, a lot of suppression, sounds like.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about your relationship with the kids at your Kingdom Hall? How was your relationship with your peers on that side?
So I went to a congregation that was kind of isolated from that, and there weren't really too many kids my age in my congregation. There was really not many at all, to be honest. Now that I'm thinking back, I think I ended up hanging out with maybe like one or two people, maybe in junior high or so for a little bit, but there weren't really many options. So since I didn't really have many people to hang out with in the Kingdom Hall, I of course wasn't allowed to hang out with people outside of the Kingdom Hall. So I did a lot of just staying home and kind of being isolated, being in my room a lot, kind of just escaping into my own imagination or writing or games or things like that, just keeping myself occupied that way. And yeah, there really wasn't many options. They would try to do things where there was a certain elder where I guess they kind of caught on. They were like, yeah, he's not really getting like socialization or anything here. So they would try on occasion. I had one elder that would take me to a track and he would like run laps with me and stuff. It just wasn't the same though. It was kind of weird because these relationships that you're supposed to be forming with your peers, you're now forming with adult men, which is not, it's not natural. That shouldn't be your go-to experiences from the get. You should be able to have that experience of like, what is it like to mend with people who are of your own age group and kind of discover your own interests. So it was weird because I was never really allowed to have that experience with other peers other than the little bits I would get through school. But even then it was like, I had to hide that too. So I wasn't able to really come home and be like, oh, I was talking to so-and-so today. And I had to pretty much, if I had friends in school or people I talked to, just keep it on the down low and then come home and just went to school, did my thing today, did my studies. So it was very lonely, unfortunately, especially in that congregation. But, and no other people my age really ever like came through. It was very much, the congregation seemed to consist of the same people for the longest time. Maybe a few handful new people throughout the time I was there, but not much options at all, unfortunately.
That's really interesting, actually, and that's a good point that you bring up because, yeah, they're telling you in the witnesses not to hang out with the people on the outside, but then in your congregation, if you don't have many people that are around your age, you have nobody. And so there's a lot of witness kids out there that grew up, like you said, just isolated, just feeling alone, had to kind of do their own thing or be forced to hang out with adults, which is not the same. Yeah. Very, very interesting point. So how did things progress then into your teen years? Let's talk about your baptism and just any pressure that you feel with making that step.
Yeah, I know. I was baptized when I was 13, and it was a huge mistake, as many of us end up finding out. What's weird too is when I had the conversations, because you had to be sat down with an elder and go through all these questions first to see if you were worthy of baptism first, and they would test you out. And I remember it was very pressured to get baptized, not only from my mother, because she was very fanatical and probably still is, but basically, she would have elders too. Like they would be talking to me, oh, when are you going to get baptized? People get baptized young. When are you going to do it? And it was just like a constant barrage of like, when is this happening? So I kind of got baptized just to shut everyone up and to see if there was anything I could do to make my mom happy, because I felt like she wasn't really ever happy with me on things. She was always, she had her own mental health issues and things like that. And I felt like the only way to really make her happy was through this religion somehow. So I felt like if I was going to field service, she'd be like, oh, good job, things like that. So I was like, well, the only thing I can do is get baptized, and maybe that'll kind of like make her see me a little bit more and I'll be in her good graces more. And I do remember when I got baptized that I had this overwhelming sensation of like, finally, like I did something to make her happy. And of course that didn't last long. That lasted for like the day itself. And what I find funny though is I specifically remember during the questionnaires that they would give me beforehand that I lied completely through the whole thing. And I was more concerned that they were going to find out that I was lying. Like they were going to be like, wait, you don't really have the desire to get baptized. It sounds a lot more like you're saying what you're supposed to say in order to get baptized, which is exactly what I was doing. And unfortunately, because I had spent so much time around these adults, I kind of learned to do that quickly, how to just say what they wanted to hear to be able to take things off of myself, to take some heat away. So I was a little more concerned that they were going to discover that, and they didn't, which I found weird because I was like, well, I mean, if Jehovah's supposed to see everything, wouldn't he be like, this dude's lying? Like, no, he's not getting baptized. He's just faking it. But I skid right on through that whole process. I remember even when they ask you those questions before you're getting baptized, when they're like, have you repented of your sins and, given your life to Jehovah and everything? I remember I didn't even answer one. I was standing with everyone else and they're like, yes. And I was just waiting for it to be over. And yeah, it was, looking back, it's crazy because, you have, you don't let, and even Jehovah's Witness, like, you won't let your kid drink before 21. You're not going to let them, hold a weapon in their hands at a young age either, but you're okay at 13 years old to basically sign your soul over to this organization. And then they hold you to that. So even though I was 13, like just hitting puberty, just kind of discovering who I really kind of was, they're already kind of like, all right, well, that's too bad. You're already like in this process now where you're now like a convert. You're officially a Jehovah's Witness. Like that means so many other things. Like, your life as a 13-year-old normal kid is done. That always struck me as weird that they're so willing to hold you to this contract that you basically unofficially signed by getting baptized. And at that young of an age too, it's just such a huge responsibility that that they would pretend to understand, like, this is a big deal, but they're really, they're just like, whatever, just get baptized and Jehovah will protect you. And that certainly was not the case, unfortunately.
Wow. So many good points. Wow. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that matter of feeling like your parents won't accept you if you don't make this choice. And then is it really even your choice? And I'm sure there's also a lot of people out there that they went through those questions, but they weren't really there. And that in itself is kind of a waking up process because you're expecting them, like you said, to know. And when they don't, it's like, well, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Now something else that happens in your teenage years, obviously, like you mentioned, your hormones are raising, you're going into puberty. I know for pretty much all witnesses, practically, it's a challenging time. It's a time of guilt and shame because you're awakening sexually, but you're limited, And I know even as a heterosexual person, it was a constant challenge. I felt constantly guilty. You already mentioned that as young as 5 years old, probably even younger, that you already realized that there was something different. So how was that for you, going through this puberty, but having that difference? How was that for you during your teenage years? You can go in as deep as you want to, just how comfortable you are.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, it sucked. There was definitely, there was so much because it was such a huge amount of repression that was going on because I had to pretty much hide this fact. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, this is what it means to be a gay person. This is what it is. Like, I'm attracted to dudes. Okay, I get it now. But at the time, we would have these meetings 3 days a week and I'm sitting in the audience and they're all, homosexuals are bad and detestable. And you're just sitting in the audience like, well, I mean, that's me. So that's kind of, but you have to hide it there. And then it's like I'm at school and I have to hide it there as well. So it was terrifying. I remember there was points where for years I was actually so scared of how I walked in school because I'm a little more like loose at the hips and everything. So sometimes that's a giveaway for people. And I used to be so terrified just going down the hallway to go to my classes that I was like focusing on keeping my body straight in a certain kind of way. Like I was like, I have to walk, a little more masculine and kind of have a little more presence to myself because somebody might find out, something might happen. I had a situation where I got attacked by one of my schoolmates outside of school afterwards. And when my parents found out about it, they were like, well, we're gonna go to the house and we're gonna go talk to the parents about this. And I was in tears begging them, like, no, please don't go there. Don't do this. Because I knew or I was afraid that somehow, some way, the kid was going to be like, oh, well, he's gay. And that was going to destroy like the whole thing. And looking back on that, like how ridiculous, like, your parents are offering apparently to, go and help you fix this bullying problem. But you're so scared of them finding out that you're gay that you're like, no, don't confront it. I'll just continue to take it. It's not worth it. And it led to a lot of problems just in school in general, because I was always being called names. People would always accuse me of being gay. Like people would chant things on the school bus, even about me, like, and how that, it's, I can't really describe. I'm sure other people have had this experience, but when you're sitting on a school bus and you're kind of like, I always took the window seat. I was always just like focusing on my business, didn't deal with anyone. But to be sitting there on the way to school for this, 20-minute car ride or so, and to hear the entire bus screaming, Peter is gay, like for the entirety of it, and not have the bus driver stop in and kind of be like, knock it off, cut it out or anything. And things like that being so common, it was kind of a staple. Like the bullying did not relent pretty much until I was around maybe 11th, 12th grade. And even then it was still kind of a thing. It just it lessened a lot, but pretty much through that whole thing, as I was trying to discover what was going on, it just continued. And the other thing too is like I would, as like you were saying, you're discovering your hormones and everything. So, and trying to figure out how to word this, but basically I figured the form of, self-pleasure. So I was hiding that. But the thing was with my mother, whenever she would have an inkling or kind of felt like, were you just in there masturbating or anything like that? Like she would question me on it. And she would, if she found out that it happened, she would go through the house and like scream it out to my father and everything, like, oh, your son just masturbated and da-da-da-da-da. And I just felt like I was constantly under attack by somebody, because we had three systems basically. There was your home life, your school life, and your Kingdom Hall life. And then she was also constantly having elders sit down with me for conversations about things too. So I just felt like in all three lives I had there, I was just constantly being barraged by somebody not good enough for something. And I could never really be myself. I couldn't really tell anybody, what I was feeling or what I was, experiencing on the inside. I had to pretty much filter everything out the way that I felt they wanted to hear it come out. So, yeah, it definitely was, it was pretty bad. And then, like you said before, it's just a time for self-discovery in general. So for, like you were saying, for heterosexual people or non-Jehovah's Witness people, it's a tough time to begin with just that. But to have all these extra layers added on with the suppression and, it was a lot. It was a lot to handle.
That, man, that sounds horrific. I could not imagine my mother going through the house. I mean, even just hearing that secondhand, I can't even explain that. Well, that's pretty horrific, man. I'm sorry you went through that.
Thank you.
Jeez. I mean, it kind of reminds me of that time when, you're that age, your hands are the only thing you got, basically. Everybody's doing it, but nobody talks about it. And it's funny because I did have worldly friends. And, I go outside, hang out with them. And it was something that they could joke about. And I remember thinking, wow, how odd that you guys are so free with this. You can just joke about it. And whereas in my life, it's something that has to be so hidden and so something that's shameful. Wow. Yeah. That sexual repression it's so unhealthy. When I was going through the process of making that recovery book and I was working on that section, it really just it reminded me just how unhealthy that is. But speaking of that though, so you're going through this process, you're discovering yourself. Now, I know for me, when I was reaching that age, 15, 16, 17 years old, when you go to the conventions, it's different. It's changed. You're there, but you're seeing all the, the sisters, and, you can hardly pay attention. Now, for you, were you noticing the other guys that were there? Were you allowing yourself to feel that, or were you having to suppress even those feelings, to block it from yourself, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was jacked up because I remember I think because I had spent so much time, like, unfortunately, and the other weird thing too is like my mother, there was a specific instance that I remember where my mother, I don't know what she said to him, but one of the elders in the congregation on one of those Tuesday meetings where you meet at someone's home, after the meeting was over, she was like, oh, brother so-and-so wants to talk to you afterwards. So I was like, okay, whatever. So I went to talk to him afterwards, and I was a minor at the time and vulnerable. And my mother was telling me I had to talk to this man. So I'm like, okay, whatever. And so we're sitting down. He pulls me into his kitchen. Everyone else has left at this point. It's just me and him, and she's waiting in the car. And he's just asking me all these inappropriate questions, like all these really personal sexual questions. Like, what do I do?
Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out there for a second. Can you
No
go
problem.
back?
You're good.
Sorry.
But basically, yeah, so she was having me sit down and have this conversation with this elder, and it was extremely sexually invasive. And you grow up in this culture, you don't know any better, so you're just kind of like, oh, I have to answer these men, I have to be honest with them, I have to tell them everything because that's what we're taught. Jehovah is going to find out anyway. He's going to uncover the truth, so what's the point in lying about it? So I answered him these questions, and I just remember feeling so insecure and so put off and disgusted. And I don't know, it was just weird because like if your kid came home from school and told you, hey, my teacher held me after class today and he was asking me about my masturbation habits and things like that, like you would be like, oh, okay, cool, we're going right to the cops, that's nice. Like, you would be disgusted and like, wait, what? Your teacher what? Especially if you're a minor on top of that too, like, wait, nah, that's not cool. But it was weird for me that my parent basically like forced me into this conversation with this man, and that there was nothing I could do about any of these things. And she would do that a lot, where she would, anytime things weren't going her way or whatever, that was like her weapon. She'd be like, all right, I'm going to the elders. Okay, we're going to talk to the elders. They're going to come talk to you later. Just you watch. And sure enough, I would always be pulled aside in the Kingdom Hall or something, to have some random conversation about whatever. But when we went to these conventions and everything, because of all these things, I think because I had so many experiences, I felt weird because it was like I didn't really feel attracted to like my peers or anything, because I had been stuck in this bubble where I had nothing but adult men to talk to about things like this. I did notice that there were times where I would kind of let my eyes wander a little bit on some of like the, the adult brothers that were there. And, at the time it's weird because you're like, what is going on? Like everyone else my age in school is like into people their age, like all this stuff is happening. And I mean, I would never let it show. Like, obviously I never, said anything about it, but like you said, there's so many people around you in these conventions. And, but mostly, to be honest, though, I feel like during conventions, I just kind of tuned out. I would just be like, I just had school Monday through Friday. The last place I want to be is sitting in this convention hall for the entirety of this day. Like, this is basically like a school shift all over again. You had to travel an hour or so to get there. So yeah, there were times where I did find myself looking at other people there, but I felt like I was a little more covert about it. But then, like you were saying before, like the guilt and shame does come back up. So then you're sitting here, you're in the meetings, like during this convention, having these feelings and thoughts, and you're just like, oh my God, Jehovah's looking down on me right now. And he's just like, man, you're nasty. You're disgusting. So it was weird because you're here trying to learn and like be a better Jehovah's Witness. But at the same time, you're just like silently whipping yourself at the same time because you're like, what's wrong with me? Why do I have these feelings? And no matter how much I prayed on it, like I remember actually when I got baptized, there was a part of me that was like, when I dip under this water, I'm going to be cured because I'm getting baptized and I'm going to go forward. Once I come out of this water, it says like, your sins are washed away. And if being gay is a sin, then it should be washed away. And I came up out of that water and I was like, I'm still gay. So I don't know. It was a very confusing time. And yeah, it was just really hard going through those experiences, especially, going to these conventions and everything and having surround yourself with so many people, but also at the same time feeling like out of all those people, you just don't belong there. Like you just, it just felt like I was a fish out of water whenever I went to those events, especially because of the amount of people and the amount of people I would watch. I would see other families and they would seem like they were fine, which I know isn't true. But at the time, at the age I was, you're under the impression that, everyone else has their stuff together and you're just wrong. So yeah, those were not fun times either.
Wow. I gotta just pause and say, really, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah.
Because this is a perspective that we don't get, and it's really making me realize there's a whole nother level of suppression that people out there are going through that we don't even get to hear about. And it's really important topic right now because now we're living in an age where people can, well, outside of the organization, people are feeling more comfortable to come out. Like you were talking about in your high school, in your school days, you were made fun of, you were picked on. If that were today, depending on where you live, but there's a good chance that you'd be more accepted because the kids nowadays are just they're more open-minded and more people are more kids are realizing that they're that way. So I'm sure there's a lot of witnesses out there who are feeling exactly what you described.
Yeah.
And having to go through that extra, like I said, I didn't even realize that there was this whole other layer of suppression that anyone who's not heterosexual is going through. Jeez. Okay, well, anyway, so the next question is how did things progress as you moved into your adult years? What challenges did you face in your adult years as a witness?
I started becoming, I guess, after I started getting angry because as I was becoming a teenager and the hormones were raging, I started realizing like, this is so messed up. Like this whole situation, like I feel like everywhere I go, no matter what I'm doing, somebody's angry or disappointed with me. Somebody's upset. Somebody's going off about something I did or said and I wasn't like because I wasn't allowed to hang out with people. I didn't, I wasn't out. I didn't do the whole sneaking out to drink or like going out to have sex with people or anything like that. Like I just went to school and, went to classes, didn't really stay after school because you weren't allowed to do that. So I just went to school, went to classes, came home, did my homework and just kind of rinse, wash, repeat, did the whole Jehovah's Witness thing, field service and, all that. But I would say it started really affecting my mental health very badly around the time I became maybe 15 years old or so. And I was also in my household, unfortunately, both my parents were very physically abusive. So, and I had a brother and sister. We all got treated differently. So it was weird. I was the oldest. So things kind of seemed to fall on me more because apparently that's what happens when you're the oldest. Everyone kind of looks to you to kind of keep control of things. And it was a huge struggle because we were kind of pit against each other at the same time too. Like whenever something bad would happen, it'd be, don't be like your brother because blah, 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 blah. And that was the other thing too is, I was going through so much abuse at home that I didn't even know it was abuse. I just thought this was normal and that everyone kept quiet about these things. So, I basically had a complete mental breakdown. By the time I was 16, I had found out, and this trigger warning for anyone, but I started to cut myself. And I don't really remember how I found out about it, maybe through psychology class or something like that. But I think at first it started just because I wanted to try it to see what these things people were talking about, because I would hear other people, I guess, that were in my age group. There was one girl in particular that had came to me and told me that she tried it before, and she was talking about how it basically was like, taking the pain out of your mind and onto your body, so that way you would focus on that instead of what's happening in your mind. And at the time, my mind was deeply going through a lot. And so I would do that. I would, when nobody was home, I would take a knife and I would start slashing at my legs and stuff. And it became kind of like an addiction. And I was doing it very frequently. And eventually one of my classmates that I was a little more comfortable with, she found out that it was happening to the point where I had a little bit of a limp to my walk at one point, because I didn't know what I was doing. So I wasn't cleaning it properly and things like that. So infections. And she got so concerned that she went to her guidance counselor and was like, hey, I have a friend here and he's been like self-harming and things like that. And as soon as they found out about that, I got pulled out of class and brought to my guidance counselor. And I was terrified, because I was like, what happened? Like, what's wrong? And so she started mentioning to me, she was like, I've been hearing that you've been cutting yourself, and like what's going on exactly? What's happening at home? And I couldn't tell her. We're not supposed to tell outsiders things that are happening at home. So I was like, I don't know. I'm just having a hard time. Just been depressed. And so she called my parents in, and she sat down with all three of us and pretty much told us, like, he needs to go to a hospital. And I was completely like shell shocked. I was like, oh no, this is like, whoa, this completely elevated to something I wasn't expecting. And what sticks out to me every time I remember this memory, when I think back on that, is how she was telling them what was happening. And when it was time for them to bring me to the hospital, my mother and father got up and walked out of the guidance office. And I just followed them, and they didn't say anything to me. They didn't, they were walking ahead of me. They didn't look back at me. They didn't talk to me. They didn't put their arm around me to comfort me or anything. They just pretty much left me to walk behind them. And I just felt so weird. I didn't know what else to do. It was, you get home, and then my mother didn't want to accompany me to the hospital. She was just catatonically sitting on the couch, and my father brought me there. And for a 16-year-old, it was extremely weird to, like, you're going into this place where the people that I was put in there with were, some of them were in there for some very, very serious things. So to now be in a point where, you have no freedom in a place like that, you're put in a room with random people that you don't know. You're pretty much told when you can do things. You can't come out in the hallway unless you have certain privileges. And
You're talking about like a mental care facility, or like
yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
not like
so
a,
they
not
had,
like a hospital.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So and and I wasn't really familiar with things like that. So it was just kind of like a whole new world opened up, and I was like, wow, people think this is like loony bin. Oh, this is what they mean. Okay, this is craziness. And again, I was out of there within a week, because I wasn't better, but I knew I didn't want to be there anymore, because it was pretty horrific just being in there. Like, that was like a whole new layer of hell in there. So again, I was able to kind of sweet talk my way out of that one, because every time I would meet up with the head psychiatrist that was there, he would, follow up with me, and I would be like, oh, I think I was just trying it out. I don't know what I was thinking, but just seeing the people that have it so much harder here, I feel so much better. And I think I'm ready to go home. Like, I think this has opened my eyes. Not at all. I just wanted to get out of there, but I was able to get out. And I feel like after that point, after I got out of the hospital, it just completely changed. Everything was totally different after that. And for the worse. It definitely made my parents a lot less. I didn't feel like they treated me like a person. I mean, I didn't feel like they really treated me like a person before, but I felt like after that, it was even more so that they were like, they had put a distance in there, and they were kind of like, this one I don't know about. So it was pretty rough.
Wow. So then what happened after you turned 18, moving into your adult years?
Um, so things kind of progressed from there. I know shortly after that, I was hospitalized another time, but this was for an overnight. Same thing, self-harm. And there were some other things that were happening that I guess my parents were starting to catch on. They were like, oh, okay, yeah, he's gay. But they weren't cool with it. So I remember my father at one point, he was like, I want to have a talk with you. So we lived in an apartment complex at the time. So there was like the community gym or whatever. And he brought me there. And he was like, I just want to let you know that if you ever tell me that you're gay, that I can't accept that. And I won't be able to accept it. And my father, so my mother was the Jehovah's Witness. My father was raised Catholic, but he wasn't really any kind of religious at the time or anything. He was very like absentee. So like he would work a lot, come home, just pass out. And then when he would wake up, he would go straight to the computer and kind of spend the rest of his night kind of on the computer. So the rest of us were just kind of around him, but it didn't really feel like he had an active part in our lives for a good chunk of it. And then whatever relationship I did have with him was just completely awful because he was more physical abuse with me than my mother was. So I was mostly raised to just be terrified of him. So I felt like the only time I really talked to him is if I wanted something, which sounds horrible, but I felt like, if I had needs or something I needed to get or wanted to get, I would kind of like, okay, so I got to be nice. I got to try to figure out how to say this where, okay, just put on the show and, hey, dad, da 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 da. And then, and it just felt so icky all the time, so gross. Like if he ever hugged me, I was like, get off me. Like I'm not into it. And it just led to a lot of conflicts. I eventually was to the point where I was running away from home a lot. I would just get up and leave. If there was an argument that was happening, I would take off. There was one time when I was about 17 or so that I was having a really hard time mentally. And I had told my father, I think I was outside actually on the house phone, and I was trying to call a schoolmate to see if I can just vent to her. And I snuck outside so I can do it. And he came outside and was like, you have to start getting ready for the meeting. And I was like, I really can't. I'm sorry, I can't make it today. And he was like, no, absolutely not. Go ahead and get ready. And I snapped. And I remember I turned to, there was a lamppost nearby, and I went to hit it, and I slashed my hand open. And so my father was following me around the apartment complex because I just took off at that point and would start walking everywhere. And he was following me, and all he was concerned about was the damages I was creating. He was like, I don't have the money to pay for this stuff. What are you doing? Meanwhile, my hand is gushing blood all over the place. And all he was concerned about was the lamppost or whatever was happening. And so he took me to the hospital, and I had to get stitches. So I got to miss the meeting, but not the way I wanted. And things like that, just it continued that way. My siblings and I kind of had a disconnect, but it was weird because like my sister and I she had a similar experience where she also didn't have people that were her age group. So me and her seemed to kind of bond together. And it was weird. There was really not much I could do. But when I was 18 and I decided I want to go to college, that was like a whole nother can of worms. And again, she got the elders to come outside after a meeting one night. My sister and I were sitting in the car, and it was two of them, and they were like, oh, we heard you were going to go to college, because I decided it wasn't too far away. And I was like, well, I want a dorm because I wanted to get out of the situation. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I have to get out of this house. And excuse me. So I went ahead and was adamant, like, no, I'm gonna go do this. I want to go dorm. I want to go to school. And just the fact that I was pursuing higher education was like a huge turnoff to them. And I remember these elders coming out after a meeting one night, and they were just like, yeah, we heard you're gonna dorm? You're going to college and you're gonna dorm? And I was like, yeah. And then immediately he like snapped, and he was like, you're telling Jehovah that he doesn't know what's best for you. And I remember like I just started laughing. I was just like, that is so ridiculous. Because at that point I had seen so much that at this point at 18, I was like, there is no way this is not truth. This is something different. I don't know what it is, but it's not truth. It's not what we've been told it is. And so I think maybe they were sensing that I was phasing outwards. And I do remember that when I got into college, when I was 19 at this point, things completely, like at that point, changed. And I was at a school dance one night, and because I wasn't allowed to go to prom, so this was like a college thing. So I was like, I'm going to do this because it's going to give me the experience that I was going to get with prom, but I didn't get to have. So no one knows about it. There's no one here I don't have to sign a permission slip. Like, I get to go do this now. And I remember the night that I was having the dance, my mother called me and she was like, your father wants you to tell your college that you're going to go independent and pay for your own self by now. Granted, at the time, I was never allowed to have a job. Anytime I wanted to have a job, I was constantly told, no, I can't have a job. They always tried to say it was something about it would mess up the income to where we couldn't live there anymore or something like that. But it was, no matter where we were, it was always like, oh, no, you can't do that. So anytime I had like an ambition to do anything like, driving, like getting my license, I didn't get my license until I was out of their household and I was 22 years old somewhere else. There was never anything that I had interest in was always like squandered straight down. Like they weren't having it. They were like, no, you're not going to learn how to drive. Get out of here. They would take me on occasion to like do lessons, but nobody made sure I was like, well, let's go get your license or, let's go get you that job. When I was in college, I went ahead and got myself a job at a movie theater. And so I was doing that for a little bit. And things just got to the point where I eventually started to explore my sexuality while I was there in college. And it just it changed my perception. And it also brought a lot of guilt and shame too, because I was like, oh, you're not supposed to do this. And here I am. And now I'm doing exactly what they said I would do, going to college and becoming a wild person and all this. And I had started dating someone that was there and keeping that secret. And the night that she called me at this dance and told me all this, I don't know, something just snapped in me. And I was taking the conversation as she was saying what it turned out to be, that, like from now on, we're cutting our ties and we want you to kind of do your own thing. And to have gone through everything I went through with them and be told like, yeah, you're going to just stick it out on your own, even though we haven't given you the tools to make it in this world, figure it out. I lost it. And I had called my grandparents and I talked to my grandfather, and I don't know what happened, but I just like word vomited like everything, like the abuse, that I was gay, all the stuff that was happening. And he didn't take it very well. I remember he seemed to just like be in shock, like, wait, what is all this stuff? And he had a very bad panic attack over it. And because he had the panic attack over it, relatives and people who, in the family that knew of it, they were all pissed off at me. Nobody really wanted to talk to me for a while. My mother even told me at the college, after she found out that I had this conversation, she dropped me off at the dorms. And she was just like, all you ever did was bring this family hell. Don't talk to any of your uncles because everyone's pretty much ready to kick your ass right now. Like all this other stuff. And that was the last time I had seen her in person for years. She left me there and was like, that's it. And she just sped out. And shortly after that, my father asked to meet up with me. And when I did, he handed me a letter and I opened it to read it. And it literally was just like, from this day forward, my parents' names are no longer going to be supporting our son Peter in any way, shape, or form. And they had it notarized. I still have the letter because it was just, I still can't believe that. Literally handed me a letter of disownment. Like they were like, you're not our kid anymore. We're not supporting you. If anyone needs financial documents from you, you make sure you give them this so that we're not paying for it. Like that's it. My father had called me a few days after that and told me that I was no longer allowed to associate with my brother and sister, that if I wanted to talk to them, I had to go through him. And I asked him, I was like, well, what are you going to tell them? And he was like, I don't know, we'll figure something out, but you're not talking to your brother and sister anymore. And so I remember one of the instances where I had to kind of come by the home to grab some things. And my brother, who I think was like 12 at the time, he spotted me. He was in the playground. He spotted me and we made eye contact. And because I was told I was forbidden to talk to them, I had to duck my head with my friend in the car. And I was like, just leave, just leave, just leave. And when I looked up, he was in tears and bawling and crying. And it's something I'll never forget. And there's nothing I can do to change any of that, unfortunately. That situation's over. I don't, to this day, my brother and sister don't talk to me. I've had maybe like just a few little conversations here and there over the years. Because this was back in 2007 that all this happened. And from 2007 till now, they haven't been in my life. So I ended up, the grandparents that I spoke to, she ended up telling me, because my parents at that point, they took my house key and everything, and they were like, no, you're not coming back. That's it. I had an uncle that's a JW elder at the time, and I called him and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, my parents are telling me I can't come home. Like, that's it. I don't have anywhere to live. Like, what do I do? And he was like, well, maybe you can go ahead and call a shelter. And this was a blow to me because that same uncle, that same elder, he had pretty much been like my surrogate father figure like my entire life, because my father wasn't involved in the JW stuff. He was always the one picking me up for field service. He was always the one that I would spend more time with. So for him to kind of just like turn around and so coldly be like, I don't know, figure it out. And I was still a witness. Like, I still had the title of being a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't get disfellowshipped or dissociated or anything yet. So it was very weird. And from that point onwards, pretty much, I actually stayed, like, I was still a witness until I think maybe 6 or 7 months after that, where that same elder uncle called me up and he was like, oh, so, what have you been up to? What have you been doing? Have you been going to meetings or anything? And I was like, no, I haven't. And he was like, oh, so you're just hanging out. Okay. And I was so ticked off from that conversation that was the moment I took an index card. I just grabbed the first thing I could find and I wrote my whole disassociation letter on that index card and I mailed it to him. And I was like, there you go. Make sure you hand that into the congregation. And from that point onwards, I was done with it.
Wow. Jeez. That is a lot. That's a lot. And for your parents to just cut you off like that, even, like you said, you hadn't even dissociated or nothing at that point yet. Whoa. So, okay, so now you've disassociated. So, what actually woke you up? You said that you still felt guilty when you were after college, you're exploring your sexuality. So you still had that mentality a little bit. So what actually woke you up then?
Yeah. Oddly enough, it was the experience in the hospital. When I was 16 and I was in the hospital, there were some elders that came to visit me. And, they brought their Bible and they were sitting down and talk to me and counsel me or whatever. And there was this moment in front of my parents and everything where I looked at the specific elder and I was like, can you please have the congregation pray for me? Because I'm really in a bad time right now. And he said, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that would bring reproach on Jehovah's name. So I think we won't be able to do that. And when he said that to me, I remember just being so, and then the fact that my parents didn't say anything, that they sat in silence, just that I think was my biggest wake up moment where I was like, so let me get this straight. Like, now that I need help and I'm asking for help, and, you have the whole scripture about like the lost sheep and that they come and find the sheep and bring them back and everything. And I'm asking you to just like, I just need support. I need the congregation to kind of flock around me and kind of help me right now because I'm in a bad place. And to be told that, no, you can't do that because it's going to look bad. That was really disgusting to me, actually. I was pretty revolted after that. And that was probably the biggest moment where I was like, nah, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. And the other moment where I was pretty much like, yeah, that's it, would be there was an instance where there was, again, abuse that was happening at home. And I had called one of the elders and I was like, I need help. Like, I'm being driven insane in my own home. I don't know what to do. And he was, because of the hospital stuff and everything, he was like, well, Pete, let me ask you a question. Do you think you've been a pleasure to have in your home? And I was just in stunned silence. Like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, so I was being made to feel like I deserved what they were doing to me. And he was like co-signing on it. Like, I mean, of course they're going to do things like that because you're rambunctious and rebellious. Like, all this other, I don't know. It was just such a weird series of events where I was like, and then to think back on the other things where I was like, as my parent, you were forcing me to have these, sexual conversations with these adult men that who does that? Like, I'm not there. Why do I have to sit down with these people and tell them what I'm doing in my private business? Like, and the fact that you're forcing me to sit down and have these conversations with them, it was just so many things. Like, it all kind of started to compound together until I was like, I don't care that this is going to cost me everything. I just have to get out of here because what's happening in here is killing me. It's making me to the point where I'm like, you shouldn't want to die like that. You shouldn't be that young and feel like you're already done with life. Like, there's no way. All these things were just kind of adding up to where I was like, this is not the truth. There's no way. There's no love here. I'm not feeling support. I'm not feeling any of this. It's just been isolation, alienation, and judgment. And yeah, I would say with all those things, that was all combined together. What finally snapped me awake and was like, nah, there's no way. I'm out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, they put you through that much stuff. Yeah, you're gonna realize this ain't it. And it was kind of interesting. You tell that story about me being in that the hospital. I've heard from a lot of people that there's a lot of witnesses that end up in those hospitals, and it just goes to show how that toxic environment it can have an effect on you. It brings you down. So a little bit of a heavier question here, but something that really needs to be asked, especially in the XJW community. So, what would you say to those who believe that being gay is a choice? This is something that we were led to believe as witnesses, and people leave the organization and they can still carry that belief with them. So now we're speaking to someone who is gay. What would you say, people that have that belief?
I would say that that's complete ridiculousness because nobody would choose this much persecution if they could change. Like, if I could change that and be like, no, I'm going to be a heterosexual, then I would have done that a long time ago. If that would have avoided me getting beaten all the time and pulled aside to have these conversations and hospitalized at 16 for self-harm, like, I would have done that. Like, there's no way. And like, for heterosexual people, like, you don't choose to be heterosexual. You didn't walk up to a man and a woman, look at both and say, yeah, I think I'm going to actually go with the woman. Like, you just, sorry, there's someone mowing the lawn outside. But, you don't choose that stuff. It's just something innate inside of you that as a heterosexual person, you just feel a natural attraction to women. And it's the same exact thing with gay people. Like, you just feel a natural attraction to your same sex. And that's really all it is. I remember they would do this thing in the Kingdom House where they'd be like, oh, well, here's an account from a recovered brother who used to be a homosexual. And I would just laugh and be like, anyone who says they used to be gay and is now straight and they cleanse themselves, like, you were not gay then. You weren't really gay because you can't just pull that part of you out. Like, if I wish there was times where I could go up to an elder and be like, if I told you that you had to divorce your wife and you had to suddenly become attracted to men, like, would you feel that was within your character and within your abilities to do that? That's how it feels for me when someone's like, oh, well, you're just choosing this lifestyle. Or they would say lifestyle. It's like, no, you don't choose that. Like, of course you don't choose that. I mean, people are going to make you feel types of ways about it, but that's their own insecurities and biases. But for me, sitting in my body and knowing from my experiences, you definitely don't choose that. It's just, you're just a different flavor of person, basically. That's kind of, it's not something that you're picking. It just happens to you.
That's a good answer. Yeah, different flavor of person. And I like how you said, yeah. I mean, if you're carrying that belief still outside of the witnesses, that it's a choice. Listen to everything that Peter has went through because of this. There's no way that you would choose that. There's no way that you would choose that. So yeah, thank you for answering that, because yeah, I know even me, actually, to be honest, I carried that belief after I left the witnesses. What it took for me was actually the very first friend that I made after leaving the witnesses, still to this day, one of my closest friends. She was, well, lesbian, but she calls herself gay.
Mm.
And easily one of the best people that I know to this day. In fact, after going through all that trauma of leaving the witnesses and losing all my friends, there was times when I was so low. If it wasn't for her, I'm not even sure if I would be here.
Mm.
So that alone made me have to face this fact that, you know what? No, there's being different in that way does not make you a bad person. Doesn't make you a different person. You're just a person, and just a different. Just we all have different flavors. So that is love is just love. So that's something that I've been having to learn, and hopefully your interview will help other people to learn it too, because we got to be more accepting. So another question, kind of on the same line. What would you say to current Jehovah's Witnesses or people that are going through the waking up process who are hiding their sexual orientation? What would you say to them, and just talk about how it impacted you? I mean, you kind of already did, but how it impacted you having to hide that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say to you guys, you're loved. I mean, it may feel like everyone is coming down around you and you feel like you have to keep this in. I get it. Like, holding that inside for so long, being in this group of people that are supposed to be your friends, but turn on you like that the second they don't agree with something that you do or who you are. Like, it's just, your creator, no matter what anyone tries to tell you in any religion or anything, if someone put you here, it's because they wanted you to be here. That creator loves you, and that creator made you the way that you are. You're made in his image, his or her image, whatever you believe. So for anyone else and a human understanding to tell you that they think you're not worthy of your creator's love, don't listen to it, no matter what, because at the end of the day, you're still being blessed by that same creator that they are. You're not being cast aside. And, of course, you're having your struggles and troubles like everyone else, but your creator is still, making it rain on you. Like, it's still, you still provided for, you still have pleasant interactions. So don't let that make you feel that because you're this way, that you're any less worthy of love than your peers or, heterosexual people or anyone else around you. You're still a person too. You matter. And you're here to do something for somebody. You're going to help somebody somewhere. So don't give up. And just know that regardless of what anyone's telling you, that the person that put you here loves you and that you're here for a reason.
Very good answer. Yeah, very good answer. One last question. What closing statements, any advice would you have for anybody out there that's waking up, or people that are just still that are just kind of just beginning to question things? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I would say definitely critical thinking is going to be your best friend. In Jehovah's Witness culture, critical thinking is your worst enemy, but there's a reason for that. If you're smart enough to start seeing the patterns and start to be like, hold on a second, like this isn't adding up. Like when all these things were happening to me, thankfully it was my critical thinking that saved me from this scenario. Otherwise, I'd be dead by now. I would have been long passed away. They would have had a whole funeral where they gave me 30 seconds of anything about my life, and the rest of it would have been about the wonderful resurrection I would receive, and I would be given a choice to choose that, all this other stuff. Like, no, like that is not love. That's not caring. That's not unconditional love, especially not unconditional love. And, when you see these certain things that are happening when, like I'll use my hospital experience. Like I was there watching some of these people that had done some pretty horrific things to be there, but their parents were still there. Their parents still supported them. So no, it's unconditional love is unconditional love. And if anyone tells you that you're not worthy of that, that's complete crock. Don't even go with it. I've been going through some things because of all this stuff. I have symptoms of CPTSD, so I do kind of a lot of research on trying to figure things out. I am currently in the process of writing a book about this whole experience. So I'm hoping that that will be able to help other people like yourselves who are in this scenario, who may be hiding your orientations or maybe just had a really abusive situation or a bad wake-up experience. I'm hoping that that helps some people. And other than that, I would say what really matters is how you treat other people. Like, if you're, no matter what anyone says, as long as you're treating people like they should be treated, the way that you would want to be treated, like we were taught, then you're fine. Like, you don't be, I want to say some things, but don't be a bad person to people, and you're good. Just do your best to be as kind and accepting to other people. You never know what other people are going through. And for those of you who are, hiding in the organization right now, I totally understand, because, some of you are losing your whole families if you decide to be honest with yourself. Just know that no matter how bad you're feeling, there is an exit for you. There is definitely an out. It might take a little while for you, but don't lose sight of that light at the end of the tunnel. It's there. I never thought I would reach it. I'm still struggling now, obviously, but I would take this life any day over what I was going through back then. So you're going to make it. You're going to get out eventually, and you're going to be stronger for doing so. So hang in there.
Wow. Great advice. Great advice. Well, really, thank you so much again for coming on. You are giving a perspective that, again, it needs to be showed, and it's not quite as popular, but I know there's a lot of people out there that can relate to you, and they need to hear your side. They need to hear your perspective. And the other side, like I said, you leave the witnesses. They pump your mind with all these ideas about people, and they need to hear from someone who's gay, who's had to live in that environment, what you guys have to go through. And like I said, even just listening to you, it just shows that there's a whole nother, I thought I was suppressed. There's a whole nother level of suppression that I can't even imagine having to live through, and there's other people out there that are living through that. So thank you for being a voice for them. Seriously.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So hopefully you guys enjoyed that interview. Thanks again to Peter for coming on. I know for sure there's got to be parts of that story that were very hard to tell. So truly, thank you so much for coming on and being vulnerable and sharing your story with the hope of helping others who are waking up. And as I said in the intro, a big theme that I got out of his story, there's a lot of things going on in his story, but a big theme that I got out of his story was that very thick, unhealthy layer of suppression. As witnesses, we all had to go through this suppression. But people that are like Peter, people that are living alternative lifestyles, they have a whole extra layer of suppression that they have to deal with. And then there was also just the fact that, his mom was having him continually talk to these elders, about his personal life, personal details, in ways that would be highly inappropriate if it were not in a religious context. And we see this all the time in the Jehovah's Witnesses, where they do things that seem normal in the organization, but when you look at it anywhere from the outside, it's completely inappropriate. It's completely toxic. It's completely wrong. So it's very, very, very important that we keep exposing this stuff, because people on the outside, they don't realize that this level of BS is going on regularly within the organization. Regularly. People on the outside don't realize that kids are being put in this position where they have to have these highly inappropriate conversations with much older men who they have no relation to. So thank you again, Peter, for helping to expose this. And thank you to all of you for all your support and for watching this interview. You guys are also contributing to helping to expose these things. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy on yourself, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.